So, can men speak about women's issues? Mansplaining. Just Google that word. There's a really good article online. This feminist talks about why that word needs to go. And she's a white feminist, and it's brilliant. Just Google it. It's awesome. Well, when people ask that question, can men really speak to women's issues? I wonder, when the Quran was revealed to our Prophet, peace be upon him, why was he permitted and given authority by God to speak on behalf of all of creation, including women? Is he not a man? Was he not a man, rather? Did not his words, which came from Allah, include all of creation? We accept that as practicing Muslims, so why at this point do the same people who identify as Muslims take issue with any man, not just Daniel, but any man, speaking even remotely about something to do with women's issues? And if that doesn't convince you enough, then let's talk about identity politics, which is, something that came to the fore in the 1960s. Everything happened in the 1960s, apparently. And it was a response to the failure of the Western political left to bring about fundamental social and economic change. And since then, people are increasingly evaluated as constituents of subset classifications, whether it's race, ethnicity, religion, gender, disability, sexuality, and so forth. Since then, identity politics has infiltrated our discourse, be it social or political, and it teaches us to always begin our statements with qualifiers, so as to sort of redress or disqualify anyone who falls outside of that subset. And I'll give an example in just a moment. So why is identity politics problematic? Well, because most of these categories are already determined for us, except for maybe religion. You don't choose what gender you're born into. You don't necessarily get to choose your family. You don't get to choose your nationality. You don't get to choose your race. These things are determined for you at birth. And so we have no control over those things. But identity politics tells us that we're doomed or damned depending on what subsets we're born into. So if you're a woman, get ready to fight the patriarchy. And if you're a man, get ready to be emasculated. That's just the way that it is. And so in that sense, it's very disempowering. It causes us to become complacent because our worth is being measured by our birth subsets. And in some ways, I think it infantilizes us as adults. It makes us feel like we're constantly in need of playing defense rather than taking hold of our own lives and our own choices in the ways that Islam tells us to. And Islam rejects identity politics. We know that our worth is contingent upon our iman and our taqwa. It has nothing to do with our race or our gender or our ethnicity. It has everything to do with something that we have control over and that we can strive to improve. So the rhetoric of identity politics is rooted in three rhetorical fallacies, and they work in tandem. The first is the a priori authority, the second is ad hominem arguments, and the third is the false alternatives. And the reason I'm talking about identity politics is because feminism falls within or uses the language of identity politics. So folks who subscribe to the rhetoric of identity politics will oftentimes rely on a priori or a priori authority. So they'll use certain phrases, as I mentioned, from the onset in order to establish presumed authority and credibility that comes after. So by starting a statement with, I as a woman, that means nothing you say is gonna matter at this point, right? Or I as a gay man, nothing you say as a straight man is gonna matter, right? And this kind of subjective language has now become valid in debates and in political discourse. So being a member of a subset identity group lends a speaker supposed, and that's the key word, supposed authority or authentic insight, and it leads him or her to demand redress as a victim of systemic oppression. And in this case, we're talking about feminism and the patriarchy. But on the flip side, the other subsets are viewed as less authentic and they're written off due to historically inherited privilege. So identity politics, of which feminism is a fan, it hinges on the rhetoric of victimhood, that you are born as a victim, and pretty much nothing you do unless you fight is going to change your conditions. And the thing that you're fighting are these phantasmagorical notions like patriarchy. Good luck finding it. The emotional responses that I often hear from Muslim feminists, like, I'm offended, or how dare you, like that poster, how dare you, it now carries weight in debates when reasonable conclusions are drawn that threaten the beliefs of the person who is claiming victimhood. So all bets are off at that point. Somebody's offended, done. I mean, don't you get offended when feminists talk? I do. We carry on. But I think what Daniel has discussed is a matter of reason and evidence, and it's why I'm a fan of much of what he has to write and what he has to say. And if you look closely, it's actually feminists in their responses to much of what he has to say who are employing gender essentialism to cast over generalizations. So if we're going to reject him or any other man or woman who is critical of feminism, if we reject an idea on the basis of the speaker or his delivery, then we fall prey to what is known as the a priori fallacy. And when we're analyzing and debating the topic, we have to understand the speaker is irrelevant. Focus on what he is saying. The message is what we're after, and we have to learn to separate the person from the problem. And this is something that continuously breaks down dialogue between critics of feminism and feminists. And if you just take a look around the room, I mean, where are the women? So you may not like the message, and you may not like how that message is being delivered. I know that some of you are more offended by Daniel's approach or his style, more so than what he has to say, but can you cogently refute the message itself? Can you, with a straight face and with a clear heart, say that what he is arguing goes against Islam? So keep in mind that when you're having conversations with or about feminism or feminists, that identity politics is going to sort of dictate and police the conversation. You need to reframe that dialogue before you even have it. And you need to make sure that from the beginning, you are leaving emotions to the side, and you're having a very objective, as much as possible, conversation about the topic at hand. Okay, so then, is feminism antithetical to Islam? I know there are tons of articles out there by Muslim women who say, no, it is not, and then they'll cite, different parts of the Quran or the Hadith, and talk about Khadija, and women riding horses, and all of that good stuff. Okay, yeah. We already established that feminism is an ideology that seeks to modify in its least aggressive form, or if not completely overthrow Islam in its most aggressive form. And we've already established that it's grounded in identity politics, which Islam overthrew when it was revealed to the Prophet 1400 years ago. And we've already established that feminism thrives on the notion of a patriarchy. It doesn't matter what category of feminism you subscribe to. So I think for these reasons, if none other, any version of feminism is clearly going to be antithetical to Islam. It is a competing ideology. It is rooted in secular liberalism, which we understand is the separation of religion and state, and Islam does not agree with that. Islam is a lifestyle. It permeates every aspect of a human's lived experience. And so if feminism itself isn't sort of birthed out of secular theory, it is going to brush up against many of our Islamic tenets. So I would say that we have to do sort of a historical analysis, at least starting with the fall of the caliphate. We at least have to start there to understand the ways in which, if not further back, to understand the ways in which feminism or feminist theory has permeated the Muslim world, and the ways in which it's manifesting itself today to be this Muslim or Islamic feminism. So the last thing I'll say is I just want to address the noise and the controversy that continues to surround this topic. I decided it was important to speak up on this issue because to not do so would have meant to allow feminists within the Ummah to speak on my behalf. And it would have meant accepting the prevailing narrative among Muslim millennials that indeed there is a system within Islam that is out to get each and every female. If I were to remain silent, it would be to concur with feminists that Islam, the Quran, and the divine revelation of our Creator is actually faulty. So I also decided to speak out because I know that there are many silenced Muslim women who are too intimidated and fearful to speak their minds. And they, like men, are shouted down or silenced by feminists within our ummah, all too often in aggressive, violent, and un-Islamic ways. I've been there, I am there, and honestly, there's no shortage of ridicule and threats that comes through my inbox daily, but we persevere, alhamdulillah. It takes a lot of courage to change your worldview, and I know this because I reverted to Islam. It takes a lot of energy, it takes a lot of sacrifice. You will lose people in your life, and it takes time. And if you genuinely are committed to seeking reason and truth, then analyze the evidence objectively and separate the person from the problem, debate the ideas and not the people. Jazakallahu khairan. Thank you so much for your time.